Okay, for today's composition segment, I want to talk about panning shots. It's been such beautiful weather here lately, and we're coming up into the summer, and there's going to be all sorts of outdoor events going on. I'm sure a lot of you are going to want to take your cameras out and take photographs of things that are moving around. And this technique, panning shots, particularly applies to anything that's vehicle related. So bicycles or cars or bikes or whatever are great subjects for a panning shot. So I thought I'd go through, it's not so much a composition segment as a technique segment today. I thought I'd go through some of the basics on how to get yourself set up to take some really great panning shots. So what you're going to be doing, of course, is you're going to be choosing a subject that is moving through the frame, and you're going to try and continually focus on the subject as it moves through the frame to try and keep the subject stationary while the background moves and blurs behind it. And that is the key here, is to get some blur in the background of the shot. So what you're going to be choosing to do is you're going to want to shoot continuous mode, because you're going to want to try and get a few of these. These are that you're going to have a lot of discards here, so thank heaven that your cameras are digital now, because this is a very expensive proposition with film. But what you're going to do is you're going to take a whole bunch of photographs and obviously choose the good ones out of that, and your hit rate will be lower than you used to. So you're going to choose continuous shooting mode, and if you've got one on your camera, most of these SLRs have, you're going to want to choose the continuous focusing mode as well. So you're going to pin your focusing mode to one of the focus points on your camera and say, I want you to continually focus on this point. So as you move the camera through the shot, the camera will continually focus on the subject, which you're going to need to keep that focus point pinned on the subject that you're trying to keep in focus. You're also, the basic starting way to do this is to choose shutter priority mode, and you're going to want to choose a shutter speed that will give you blur, because obviously what you're trying to do here is you're trying to blur the background, and you're going to keep the subject in focus by keeping your camera focused on the subject as it moves. So remember the old rule of thumb for choosing a shutter speed that will give you a focus picture is to choose 1 over the focal length of your camera. So if you're shooting at 70 millimeters, then on a traditional 35mm camera, or on a 5D or a 5D Mark II, or one of the cameras that's got a full frame sensor, you can be fairly confident that if nothing's moving in the frame, you'll get a good focus shot at 1 over 70, which is a 70th of a second. So you might want to choose something a 70th or faster. 100th of a second, for example, would give you a nicely focused shot at 70 millimeters. Of course, what we're after here is a blurred shot, so you want something that is slower than a 70th. So a 50th or a 40th or something like that should give you some motion blur in the background, and of course the slower you go, the more blur you will get. But that isn't the only thing that affects how much blur you get. You also need to consider how far away you are from the subject, and in particular how far the subject is away from the background. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be looking at, because of course if you've got a subject here and you're panning across, the background, if it's a big distance, is going to relatively move further, and therefore you'll get more blur. Something that you can do that will encourage that effect is if you use a longer focal length, then that compresses the shot, which will emphasize that motion of the background against the subject. So long focal length cameras, long focal length lenses will emphasize that motion. So that's a useful technique. When it comes to choosing your location for taking these shots, what you're after is a location where the subjects that you're going to be shooting move across the camera, not towards you or away from you, because if you choose those locations, your continuous focusing on your camera is going to have a very hard time keeping the subject in focus. If it's moving across the shot, there's a lot less focus changing to do, and you'll find that your pictures come out a lot better. So choosing corners, for example, is a particularly good location, because subjects tend to slow down for the corners, and that means that the amount of movement you're going to do when you're taking these panning shots is less. Don't worry about the fact that it's a slow movement at that point. If you've got your shutter speed and your aperture and everything set right, you will still get a motion blur that looks like they're moving very fast. So those slower corners are an excellent location to choose if you can get there. Of course, the other thing you want to do is, because you're going to be panning, you really only want to be panning left to right. You don't want to be trying to pan up and down or anything. So subjects that bounce up and down like people or horses or whatever, they're extremely difficult to do panning shots on. You might want to consider an advanced technique with a flash to get those, which is a lot harder. But anything with bicycles or motorbikes or cars or anything like that, where the panning is smoothly level with the ground, perfect subjects. And in particular, if you can, use a monopod or a tripod with a good smooth turning head. So something like a ball head, a good quality ball head, or a panning tilting head, if it's a good smooth one, will give you a nice smooth panning action. But if a monopod will do nicely. All you got to do is take the weight and then just turn as you go, and you can keep that shot pretty smoothly in focus. So you want to use a monopod. You want to get shutter priority. Choose a nice low shutter speed, a 40th of a second, something like that is a good place to start. Continuous focus, continuous shooting, and then choose the subject as it pans across. Now, there are a couple of advanced techniques. If you're really feeling like going for extra credit, what you can do is choose your aperture and shutter speed manually. We've already talked about choosing a shutter speed. Of course, your aperture will control the depth of field. So if you choose a smaller aperture, you'll get more of the subject in focus. That can be very nice if you've got a subject where it is moving maybe slightly closer and further away from you. But of course, in that case, you're going to have to use the ISO to get the correct exposure. So that's a little advanced technique if you're really in command of your camera and you know how to do those things. And I also alluded briefly just then to another advanced technique, which is to use the flash while you're shooting these panning shots. If you can, and if you can get light readings or whatever, or maybe experiment to get the flash power correct, you can, for example, use a flash partway through a panning shot to freeze the motion. Now, the reason you can do that is because a flash is typically like 1,000th of a second, something like that. It's very, very, very fast. So even though you're moving your camera and you maybe have the shutter open for a 40th of a second while you're moving your camera, the flash fires at some point during that and it will freeze the motion because it's 1,000th of a second or thereabouts of light. And because the flash only reaches so far, if you can get the balance right, there is a sort of a law of doubling drop off with flash power. So you'll notice that when you shoot with flash, anything that's very close to the camera tends to get a lot of flash power, and then anything that's further away will get next door to nothing. Quite often the flash just won't reach there at all, and you end up with these pictures where it looks like somebody's been taking a photograph of them and they're just in deep space. There's nothing behind them at all because the flash didn't reach there. So that drop off of light due to distance can be your friend when it comes to these panning shots. What you end up doing is you end up exposing the subjects in the foreground with the flash and freezing them, and then the background, because it's further away and the light hasn't reached there, or not as much of it's reached there, you get that nice blurred effect with the panning shot. And that's a very advanced technique, and it can take a lot of setting up to get that right. But if you can do it, the results are absolutely stellar, particularly if you can shoot from low down up towards the sky, because you can get light from the sky in the background there, and it makes it a little easier to balance the light. So that's your technique for today. Lots and lots of stuff to play with there, lots and lots of techniques for you to try out, particularly if you're going to any kind of vehicle rally or bikes or a motocross or something like that. It's a fantastic fun technique to try. This video is an extract from an episode of Photo Walkthrough, an online TV show all about photography and digital photo editing using Photoshop and Lightroom. If you'd like to see more, head on over to photowalkthrough.com, where you can find all the old shows and subscribe to the new ones for free.